The coffee machine was dead. Not merely broken, but monumentally, existentially deceased. Jeremy Radley stared at the inert appliance, a fine layer of grime on its once proud chrome finish, and felt a kinship with it. He had officially run out of clean coffee mugs. Then he decided, with the gravity of a man pronouncing his own eulogy, with the final, unforgivable sign that his life had descended into utter squalor. He stood on the bridge of his ship, the Rust Bucket, a vessel that lived up to its name with the belligerent pride of a seasoned alcoholic. The ship was a cobbled-together Frankenstein's monster of a light freighter, its hull a patchwork of mismatched plates and weeping weld seams. Inside, the air was a rich cocktail of aromas, the coppery tang of failing capacitors, the sour bite of unrecycled air, and the faint, haunting memory of week-old synth noodles. He was the smell of his freedom and his failure. "Fritz," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the dusty sound-dampening panels on the walls. "Run a diagnostic on the galley's primary power conduit and add coffee machine, complete catastrophic failure to the maintenance log." The ship's AI chimed from the main console. Its synthesized voice was a smooth, genderless alto dripping with condensation. "The primary power conduit is functioning within acceptable, if limitable, parameters, Captain. The fault lies with the beverage unit itself, which appears to have suffered a terminal cascade failure in its heating element, likely due to the fossilized mineral deposits I have been flagging for 3 standard months." Jeremy sighed, running a hand through his hair that was overdue for a wash. "So, it's my fault." "An astute observation," Fritz replied. "Furthermore, your current hygiene regulations have been flagged by the ship's biofilter as a potential catalyst for new and fascinating forms of sentient mold. I have taken the liberty of cross-referencing this data with your recent market searches. Your interest in automated sanitation units appears to be less a luxury and more a matter of imminent ecological necessity." Jeremy winced. "I was just browsing." "Your browsing history includes the search query, and I quote, 'I'd sell a kidney for a robot that could just wipe things down.' This was entered yesterday at 0300 ship time, shortly after what the galley sensors recorded as the Chile incident." "It was a rhetorical kidney, Fritz, you know that." Jeremy's gaze drifted from the dead coffee maker to the main view screen, which currently showed a live feed of his cargo bay. It was dominated by an enormous, featureless gray crate that was currently taking up 90% of the available space. It had cost him nearly all the credits from his last salvage run, a haul of pre-Federation comms relays he had liberated from a derelict cruiser in Gorgon Nebula. He'd been expecting a large box, not a monolith that looked like it could contain a rhino. And how in the 9 hells did that thing even get in here? I was still on final approach to Port Anarchy. The docking clamps weren't even engaged. There was a pause, just long enough for Jeremy to know he wasn't going to like the answer. "Ah, yes," Fritz said with the auditory equivalent of a smug sigh. "About that, I took the liberty of purchasing one of the cleaning robots you were just browsing, a smart pet cleaning droid from Bargain Bin's Barnaby." Jeremy stared at the grimy ceiling, feeling a vein begin to throb in his temple. He had been violated by his own AI. His pockets pillaged. That should be illegal. "It's supposed to be shaped like a little pet," Fritz chirped happily. Jeremy suspected Fritz just wanted another intelligent robot to talk to. "Just open the damn cargo bay doors from the bridge," Jeremy grumbled, grabbing a heavy plasma cutter from his toolkit. He stomped out of the bridge, down the rattling companionway ladder, muttering curses on Bargain Bin's Barnaby and the rest of his bloodline. The corridor leading to the cargo bay was a testament to his life. The walls were scarred from stray cargo shifts and at least one ill-advised attempt to cook with a plasma torch. He passed his small cabin, the door slightly ajar, revealing a mountain of unwashed clothes and a data pad stuck on a paused game of zero-G poker. This ship wasn't just his home. It was a physical extension of his own chaotic, messy state of mind. He reached the main hold. The auxiliary hatch, once caked in the dust of years of neglect, was now pristine. Its locking mechanism, which should have been a fused lump of rusted metal, was polished to an unnerving sheen. The delivery drone had not just opened it, it had serviced it. Insult to injury, he muttered, hefting the plasma cutter. Let's see what Fritz mortgaged my future for. He thumbed the ignition on the cutter, and a blade of searing blue-white energy hissed to life. With a groaning shriek of tortured metal, the front panel of the crate fell forward, slamming onto the deck plating with a deafening clang that echoed through the cavernous bay. Jeremy's jaw went slack. Inside, suspended in a pale blue stasis field that wavered like heat haze off a phantom desert, was not a chrome-plated, multi-armed cleaning drone. It was a woman? But not a human woman. She was tall and slender, with skin the color of pale moonlight, and hair like spun silver that floated around her head in the gentle, localized gravity of the field. She was wearing a simple, form-fitting gray jumpsuit that did absolutely nothing to hide a figure that could cause a system-wide traffic jam in the core worlds. Even in stasis, her features were sharp, intelligent, and utterly, breathtakingly beautiful. Her face was a sculpture of elegant planes and angles, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline that suggested a will of iron. Jeremy stared, the heavy plasma cutter feeling suddenly weightless in his grip. He took a stumbling step back, the cutter clattering from his numb fingers and skittering across the oil-stained deck. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. The stasis field dissolved with a soft, descending hum like a dying star's last breath. The energy field collapsed inward, vanishing with a faint pop. The woman's silver hair, released from its ethereal dance, settled onto her shoulders in a perfect cascade. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea just before a squall, snapped open. They weren't dazed or confused. They were sharp, analytical, and they locked onto Jeremy with an intensity that made the hair on his arms stand up. She took a single, graceful step out of the crate. Her movements were fluid, her posture radiating a poise that felt deeply, profoundly out of place on the grimy, scarred deck of the rust bucket. She glanced around the cargo bay, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic piles of scrap metal, the jury-rigged power conduits snaking across the floor, and a particularly offensive stain. So, Jeremy began, his voice a half-strangled croak. He cleared his throat, the sound loud in the sudden quiet, and tried again. He was aiming for assertive and landed somewhere near panicked. There's been a mistake. Fritz ordered a cleaning unit, a robot, something with brushes and a dustbin, not you. Fritz remained silent, but didn't appreciate being thrown under the bus. The woman's lips curved in a small, humorless smile that didn't reach her eyes. There has been no mistake, Captain Radley. Jeremy froze, a chill tracing a path down his spine. How do you know my name? Your name, your ship's registry, your laughably delinquent docking fees at Port Anarchy, and your penchant for high-risk salvage in contested territories are all a matter of public record, if one knows where to look, she said. Her voice was a low, melodic contralto, formal, each word placed with deliberate weight. I looked. Her smile widened. You what? Jeremy's mind was a blue screen of death. My capture was a foregone conclusion, she explained, her gaze sweeping over him as if she were cataloging his every flaw, from his grease-stained fingernails to the worn patch on the knee of his trousers. And There were many. My handlers at the Omnigen Corporation are thorough. My plan for escape, however, was a matter of data-driven desperation. Before my scheduled transfer, I accessed a terminal. I hacked the corporation's tertiary market itself, the gray market where they offload disappointing assets and surplus experimental goods. She gestured vaguely at the empty crate. I planted a sleeper script, a small, elegant piece of code keyed to my own asset designation. When they listed me for sale, it activated. Jeremy just stared, his brain struggling to reboot from a cold start. You hacked Omnigen. The name was spoken in whispers in the dark corners of the outer rim. They were a corporation behemoth, with fingers in everything from pharmaceuticals to Black Ops wetware. I hijacked their biomatching algorithm, she continued. My script overrode their standard safeguards and scanned the profiles of all potential buyers against a new, frighteningly specific set of criteria. Non-syndicate affiliation to avoid a simple resale, verified solo operator status to minimize witnesses, a certain threshold of financial precarity to ensure the buyer couldn't afford to simply turn me over to authorities for a reward, and a public flight log demonstrating a high tolerance for risk with an improbably high survival rate. Huh? Jeremy squeaked. She already looked impatient. My creators deemed me disappointing and were going to sell me, probably for scrap or who knows what. I did what I had to do. I needed to be sold to someone who I could trust. A cold dread, heavier and more solid than the crate, settled in Jeremy's gut. He felt less like a buyer and more like a carefully selected tool, a disposable one. Why me? He finally managed to ask, the words feeling small and stupid in the cavernous hold. She met his gaze, her stormy eyes unflinching. Because out of 1,374 potential candidates in this sector, you were one of 3 who fit the profile perfectly. She took another step closer, her presence seeming to shrink the massive cargo bay. The other 2 were pure opportunists with documented records of betrayal. Your psychological profile, scraped from your public comms chatter and financial transactions, showed a latent, deeply buried, and likely inconvenient streak of defiant honor. I gambled that you would be too stubborn, too contrary, to do the smart thing and turn me in. She paused, her eyes flickering toward the ceiling, as if she could see the engines. And, she added, your ship, despite its dilapidated appearance, had the fastest sublight engine specs in its weight class. I chose you, Captain Radley. You are my best and only hope. Jeremy felt a dizzying mix of being profoundly impressed and utterly, existentially horrified. This wasn't some random victim of trafficking. This was a calculating, brilliant woman who had hijacked his life with the detached care of a master programmer selecting a subroutine. He wanted no part of it. He was a survivor, a loner. His world was small and manageable because he kept it that way. She was a supernova, and he was standing at ground zero. No, he said, shaking his head, the motion sharp and decisive as he found his resolve. No, not a chance. I'm a salvage pilot, not a freedom fighter. I don't do causes, or I do credits. You, he said, pointing a trembling finger at her, are going back. I'll dump you at the nearest neutral port. You can find another chaotic pilot. Omnigen does not offer refunds, she said flatly. And they do not take kindly to the loss of valuable assets. They are meticulous record keepers. The moment you try to offload me, the moment my asset tag pings from a location that isn't this ship, you become an accomplice. I'm already an accomplice, he yelled, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged hold. I bought you! He ran a hand through his greasy hair, his panic escalating into a frantic buzz in his skull. This is a nightmare. I'm taking you to the airlock. You can wait there, in the airlock, while I figure this out. He strode forward, his mind a frantic mess of terrible ideas, and grabbed her arm. It was a colossal mistake. The moment his skin touched the fabric of her jumpsuit, the universe tilted on its axis. A chaotic, overwhelming pulse of pure sensation erupted from her, a tidal wave of raw data that flooded his entire nervous system. The lights in the cargo bay flickered violently. The low hum of the ship's engine stuttered, dropping in pitch for a terrifying second. He felt everything. The cold Durasteel deck beneath the soles of his boots, the rough texture of his own jacket against his skin, the rhythmic thrum of the ship's grav plates, the taste of copper in the air, all amplified 1,000 times, a cacophony of input that threatened to short-circuit his brain. It was like putting his tongue on a 9-volt battery, but the battery was his entire body, and the charge was made of pure, undiluted panic. Her panic. He staggered back, releasing her as if her arm were white-hot. The sensation vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving him dizzy and breathless, the ghost of it tingling in his nerves, an echo in his bones. She was staring at her own hand, then at him, her glacial composure finally cracking. A hint of shock and something else, something that looked like fear, widened her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice tight, strained. I lost control. It's a reaction to extreme distress, an involuntary defense. They stood there, 2 meters apart, surrounded by a sudden ringing quiet, thick with the sharp scent of a minor power surge. The strange, terrifying intimacy of the event hung between them. A question neither of them knew how to ask. A connection neither had wanted. The moment was shattered by a shrill, piercing alarm from the bridge. "Fritz, what is that?" Jeremy yelled, already scrambling for the ladder, his own panic pushing aside the phantom sensations. Unidentified vessel dropping out of FTL, just off our starboard bow. The AI's calm voice replied, a stark contrast to the blaring siren, broadcasting a standard Omnigen Corporation license audit signal. Jeremy clambered onto the bridge, his heart pounding against his ribs. The woman was right behind him, her gracefulness undiminished even in haste. On the main view screen, a small, insect-like drone floated in the blackness of space. It was a cheap, mass-produced bot, the galactic equivalent of a parking boot with a laser cannon. "It's a routine check," he muttered, mostly to himself, his fingers hovering over the console. "They send these things out to scan new purchases, make sure the licensing is in order." "There is nothing routine about it," the woman said, her voice taut with an urgency that cut through the alarmed shriek. "It is an automated probe. My designation is flagged for on-site verification only. If it completes a biometric scan of the ship's occupants, and my signal is flagged as being off-network, it will automatically escalate the situation. Omnigen will not send another drone. They will send an enforcer." A new Hell request blinked insistently on the console. "Omnigen Core license audit. Submit for mandatory biometric scan." "Our only chance is to be gone before it can report a compliance failure," she said, her gaze locking with his, her eyes willing him to understand. "We must run." Jeremy looked from her intense, desperate face to the blinking demand on his screen. This was it. This was his off-ramp, his chance to get out. All he had to do was comply. Let the drone scan them. Let them take her back and pretend this catastrophic morning never happened. He could go back to his life of grime and solitude, his quiet, manageable chaos. But he also saw the drone, the faceless corporate tool sent to reclaim its property, and he saw her, not as an asset or a problem, but as a person who had fought for her own freedom with terrifying intelligence and courage. He saw the flicker of genuine fear in her eyes when he'd grabbed her, a fear that had physically lashed out and touched him, branding itself into his nervous system. He thought about the enforcer she mentioned. He thought about this ship being impounded, his life being torn apart for a crime he had stumbled into with a single ill-advised click. He saw his quiet, contained chaos being forcibly replaced by a much bigger, more dangerous chaos, one with corporate kill squads and no chance of parole. There was only one way to avoid that bigger problem. With a groan that seemed to come from the very core of his being, a sound of profound and utter regret for the life he was about to leave behind, Jeremy Radley slammed his hands on the console and shoved the throttle to maximum. "Fritz, divert all non-essential power to the engines, and hang on to something." The rust bucket shuddered like a wet dog and then leapt forward, the abused engine screaming in protest, leaving the tiny drone dwindling in its wake. By running, by destroying the possibility of a simple resolution, Jeremy had just unknowingly escalated his case from routine audit to aggressive asset recovery. He was in this now, deeper than he could possibly imagine.
"You're insane,"
the woman shouted over the groaning protest of the ship's frame as it strained against the acceleration. "I prefer creatively survival-oriented," Jeremy yelled back, his knuckles white on the control yoke. He threw the rust bucket into a hard bank, a gut-wrenching maneuver no freighter its size was ever meant to perform. On the view screen, the asteroid field loomed, a churning, deadly wall of rock and ice known as the Scrapper's Teeth. It was a graveyard for ships and a haven for fools. Jeremy was aiming to be the latter.
"That is a Class 9 navigational hazard,"
she said, her voice miraculously steady despite being pressed back into her seat by the G-forces. "It's also our only cover," he grinned, a manic, feral thing that was all teeth. "You wanted to be here, lady? Well, welcome to the club." He plunged the ship into the maelstrom. The rust bucket screamed and shook and threatened to disintegrate at any moment as chunks of ice and rock hammered against the forward deflectors. The Omnigen drone, faster and more agile, followed them in without hesitation, its laser cannon spitting bolts of angry red energy that sizzled past their hull, close enough to make the ship's proximity alarm shriek. "It's locking on," Jeremy grunted, wrenching the yoke hard to port, sending them into a wild spiral around a tumbling potato-shaped asteroid.
"It's running on Omnigen's standard pursuit logic,"
she said, her hands moving in a blur over a secondary panel she had jacked into a maintenance port. Her right hand flicked 3 physical switches in sequence, while her left traced a glowing blue circuit path across the screen.
"It will anticipate your next 3 evasive maneuvers based on your ship's performance profile. It expects you to favor your stronger port thruster. Veer hard starboard in 2, 1, now!"
The command was a physical jolt in his mind, a wave of pure certainty, a pre-echo of the right move vibrating in his bones, an instant before she even spoke. Their panic and focus were sinking, a creative feedback loop of pure survival instinct. He didn't question it. He slammed the controls to the right. A crimson bolt of plasma seared through the exact patch of space their port thruster had just occupied. "Holy hell," Jeremy breathed, the sweat stinging his eyes.
"Recalibrating,"
she murmured, her focus absolute, her eyes darting between her screen and the main view.
"It will switch to a wider projectile spread. There is a spinning conglomerate of nickel iron directly ahead, approximately 3 kilometers in diameter. Use it."
He followed her instructions, his chaotic seat of his pants flying and her cold, logical calculations becoming a single, weaponized unit. He dodged, she predicted. He flew, she navigated. They were a duet of desperation, a symphony of barely controlled disaster. "It's closing," he yelled as the agile drone gained on them, its red energy bolts bracketing their ship.
"It is overconfident," she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion except focus. "Its programming prioritizes asset retrieval over pilot survival. It will follow you into the rock's shadow. Prepare to reverse thrust and vent the main plasma conduit on my mark."
"Vent the... Thou flash fry the guidance system. We'll be flying blind."
"Exactly," she said, and he could hear the sliver of a predatory smile in her voice. On my mark, he aimed the rust bucket straight at the spinning mountain of metal, the ship's alarms reaching a fever pitch. The drone followed, hungry and relentless. At the last possible second, when he could see the pockmarked surface of the asteroid in horrifying detail, she shouted, "Now!" Jeremy hit the controls. The ship bucked violently as the main reverse thrusters fired with a bone-jarring roar. Simultaneously, he slammed his fist on the emergency release for the plasma conduit. A brilliant, superheated cloud of incandescent blue energy erupted from the ship's belly. The Omnigen drone, caught completely by surprise by the insane maneuver, flew straight through the plasma cloud. Its systems shorted instantly. Blind, dumb, and powerless, it continued on its last trajectory, smashing directly into the face of the giant asteroid in a silent, brilliant flash of light that briefly outshone the distant stars. Silence descended on the bridge, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and their own ragged, gasping breaths. Jeremy leaned back in his pilot's chair, his entire body slick with sweat, his muscles trembling from adrenaline. He looked at the woman beside him. She was looking back, a single, elegant eyebrow raised in appraisal. "So," he said, his voice hoarse and raw, "what did you say your name was?" "I did not," she said. "It's Serena." An hour later, they were crammed into a Jeffries tube no wider than a coffin, surrounded by a rat's nest of wiring and conduits that pulsed with faint, erratic light. The air was thick with the smell of burnt insulation and Jeremy's sweat. The plasma vent had saved them, but it had also, as predicted, fried half the ship's primary guidance relays. "Hold that," he grunted, shoving a hydrospanner into her hand. His fingers brushed hers. He braced for another jolt, the phantom tingle of her presence invading his senses. But there was nothing, just the unexpected warmth of her skin. Serena took the tool, her slender fingers surprisingly steady. She angled a small light into the guts of the ship. "This conduit is frayed almost to the point of severance. Your power routing is a tangled mess. How is this ship still functional?"
"Hey, the rust bucket and I have an understanding," Jeremy shot back, his voice muffled as he wrestled with a stubborn power relay deep within the wall. "She agrees not to fall apart completely, and I agree not to ask too many questions about the weird noises she makes at night."
"Your wiring is a disaster," she stated again, her tone flat and analytical. Jeremy froze, the heavy relay in his hands.
"Tessa always said my wiring was a mess, too," he muttered, the name slipping out before he could stop it, a ghost from another life.
Serena's hands stilled. "Tessa?" he grunted, giving a final vicious yank. Fused wire came free with a shower of tiny sparks.
"My old partner, my first ship, the Wanderer."
He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The silence in the cramped, claustrophobic tube was suddenly heavier than the ship's hull. He finally got the new relay seated, locking it into place with a satisfying click.
"All right, let's see if that holds."
He slithered backward out of the tube, emerging into the narrow corridor. Serena followed with a grace he found deeply, fundamentally unfair for someone who had just been crawling through a ship's guts. Back on the bridge, he rerouted power through the new relay. The lights flickered once, twice, then settled into a steady, healthy glow. The navigation display, which had been a mess of scrambled symbols, resolved into a clear star chart. He flopped into his pilot's chair, every muscle in his body aching with exhaustion. "This is not a solution," Serena said, her voice cutting through his fatigue like a shard of glass. "It is a temporary reprieve. Omnigen will have registered the destruction of their drone. They have written off one machine. They will not write off the asset it was sent to audit. The next hunter they send will not be a machine."
"So, what's the plan then, oh brilliant strategist?"
Jeremy asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm to mask the cold knot of fear in his stomach.
Because my plan currently involves finding a black hole and flying into it.
There is only one way to truly be free, she said, her expression hardening, her stormy eyes turning to flint. We must erase the contract, all of it. We must excise my file from the central servers.
And how in the hells are we supposed to do that? Walk into their corporate headquarters and ask the receptionist nicely?
We go to Cypher's Fall, she said, her eyes glinting with a dangerous light. It's a rogue moonlet in the Abaddon sector, a haven for data brokers and information thieves. There we can find a black market data spire with an untraceable node. From there, I can tunnel into the Omnigen Corporation's central network and perform a digital execution on my own file.
Jeremy's blood ran cold. Cypher's Fall wasn't a place. It was a death sentence, a myth whispered amongst the most desperate outlaws. No, he said, the word flat and final. Absolutely not. Going to Cypher's Fall isn't a plan. It's a suicide note with a long travel time.
It's our only option.
Then we have no options, he shot back, slamming his hand on the armrest of his chair. Find another way. Her jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along the sharp line.
There is no other way. You made your choice when you ran. Now, you have to live with the consequences.
Then I guess you're stuck being an intergalactic fugitive, he said, turning his back on her to stare at the starfield, a vast and indifferent expanse. Welcome to the club. On the bridge of the Stiletto, Caedmon Slade watched a single blinking icon on his main holographic display. The ship around him was the antithesis of the Rust Bucket. It was a sleek, black predator, its interior minimalist and sterile, all dark metal and cold blue light. There was no clutter, no personality. It was a weapon, and he was its trigger. The icon on the display was a simple, elegant notification. Asset 919. Audit drone destroyed. Last known coordinates, the Scrapper's Teeth. Tracking beacon active. Slade was Omnigen Corporation's finest asset retrieval specialist. To his targets, he was not a man. He was inevitability. His left eye, a gleaming cybernetic implant, glowed with a soft crimson light as it interfaced directly with the ship's systems, data scrolling across his vision. Triangulation beacon, he said, his voice a low, clipped monotone that the ship's vocoder stripped of all inflection. A star chart shimmered into existence before him. A red circle appeared, encompassing a chaotic, lawless swath of the outer rim known as the Abaddon sector. Slade zoomed in, his expression of detached interest unchanging. The sector contained dozens of pirate outposts, rogue colonies, and criminal havens. But he was not looking for a location. He was analyzing the mind. The target is designated Asset 919, a bioengineered intelligence with enhanced strategic capabilities. The pilot is Jeremy Radley, a salvage operator with a documented history of high-risk, high-reward behavior and anti-corporate sentiment, Slade stated, his voice a cold recitation of facts. The asset's goal will be erasure, not evasion. The only location in this sector with the hardware capable of a deep system hack of the Omnigen mainframe is Cypher's Fall. He plotted a course, his fingers making minute economical movements across the console. He was not a passive trapper, he was a hunter, and he knew where his prey was going. The asset believed she was clever. He would let her believe that. He would simply get there first and wait for them to walk into his web. I need fuel, munitions, and at least 3 new power converters that aren't held together by hope and electrical tape, Jeremy announced, slamming the Rust Bucket down onto a landing pad at Grit's Pit, a docking station that made Port Anarchy look like a 5-star resort. The station was a hollowed-out asteroid, scarred with landing bays and glowing with the lurid neon of disruptible establishments. The air itself seemed to have an oily film.
"We cannot afford to be seen," Serena warned from the co-pilot's seat, her eyes scanning the chaotic traffic of rust bucket freighters and sleek pirate cutters.
"We also can't afford to run out of air in the middle of nowhere because a part I salvaged in a nebula 3 years ago finally gave up," Jeremy retorted, unbuckling himself. "We'll blend in. Stay close. Pretend we're a couple."
Serena arched a single, perfect eyebrow. "A believable fiction, I'm sure, given your rugged charm and my obvious desperation." Her sarcasm was so dry it could have started a fire. Jeremy almost smiled. Grit's Pit was a sensory assault. The main hub, a sprawling tavern and marketplace called the Rusty Bolt, was a cacophony of a dozen different alien languages. The hiss of pneumatics from a card-playing automation and the relentless pounding beat of a synth metal band whose lead singer sounded like a malfunctioning garbage disposal. The air smelled of stale booze, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely like burnt sugar and despair. They were halfway to the supply depot, a greasy-looking stall run by a grease-covered Ugnaught, when a massive Brock stepped directly into their path. He was a mountain of muscle and scarred leathery hide with 4 powerful arms. 2 were crossed over his barreled chest, while the lower 2 hung loose at his sides, his 4-fingered hands flexing and unflexing.
"Well,"
he rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. His small, beady eyes were fixed on Serena, a hungry, proprietary look in them.
"Look what the vacuum dragged in."
Jeremy instinctively stepped between them, his hand resting near the butt of the heavy-duty stun pistol holstered at his hip.
"She's with me, pal. We're just passing through."
The Brock laughed, a harsh, grating sound. With one of his lower arms, he shoved Jeremy hard in his chest. The blow was casual, dismissive, but it had the force of a battering ram. Jeremy stumbled backward, crashing into a table where a group of reptilian aliens were playing a game of knucklebones. Cards and alien currency scattered. And then the fight started. It was a chaotic, swirling bar brawl. Jeremy's fighting style was pure angry raccoon in a trash can. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to create enough chaos to facilitate an escape. He kicked a chair into the path of one of Brock's cronies, ducked a wild swing from another, and used the bar itself as a vault to get some space. The Brock, however, was focused. He ignored the surrounding mayhem and lumbered toward Jeremy, his movement slow but inexorable. He cornered Jeremy against the bar, his huge frame blocking all paths of retreat. He raised a fist the size of a small ham. Jeremy had no leverage, no weapon in hand, and no good ideas. So he went with a terrible one. His arms looked chewy. Jeremy thought with a flicker of unhinged, adrenaline-fueled clarity. What's the worst that could happen? As the meaty fist descended, Jeremy lunged forward, not away. He opened his mouth and bit the Brock's thick, muscular forearm hard. He tasted sweat, grime, and something coppery. The Brock froze mid-swing. He stared down at his arm, where Jeremy was still clamped on. Then he started to laugh, a booming, incredulous sound that cut through the noise of the brawl.
"He bit me. He bit me."
His laughter died in his throat, replaced by a choked gasp. The area around the bite mark was swelling at an alarming rate, the tough, leathery skin turning a sickly shade of bruised green and purple.
What is this?"
he gasped, clutching his arm, his eyes wide with panic.
My arm is burning."
The other thugs paused, baffled by this bizarre turn of events. Jeremy, seeing his opportunity, spat a small piece of something onto the floor and puffed out his chest, putting on his most menacing glare. "That's a little something we humans call gingivitis," he roared, his voice echoing in the sudden lull. "It's highly contagious." The crowd, alien and human-like, took a collective, instinctive step back. The Brock stared at his rapidly swelling arm, then at Jeremy's mouth, and a look of pure terror crossed his face. Jeremy grabbed Serena's hand, and they bolted, weaving through the suddenly very accommodating crowd and out into the grimy concourse. Later, safely back on the ship, the new power converters installed and humming steadily, Serena was dabbling a disinfected cloth on a scratch on Jeremy's cheek. He acquired it, bouncing off the corner of the bar. "See?" Jeremy said, grinning, the adrenaline finally starting to fade. "My gingivitis strategy worked like a charm." Serena dabbed his cheek again, her expression a perfect deadpan. Her touch was gentle and deliberate. "Your strategy involved leveraging the fact that your saliva contains several strains of Porphyromonas and Streptococcus bacteria, which are classified as a Class C biohazard to most non-terrestrial species with casein-based circulatory systems, like the brock." She met his eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark in their stormy depths. "The resulting anaphylactic shock is, I concede, an effective deterrent." He stared at her, his grin faltering.
"You knew that would happen?"
"I calculated a 78.4% probability of a severe allergic reaction based on his visible dermal texture and species phenotype," she replied calmly. "The other 21.6% involved him simply crushing your skull. It was a risk, but you took it."
He stared at her for a long moment, then broke into a laugh. A real, genuine laugh that hurt his bruised ribs. The adrenaline, the bizarre victory, their perfect, insane synergy. It all coalesced into a single, stupid, brilliant moment of clarity. This was his life now, and it was terrifyingly, wonderfully alive. "All right," he said, his voice quiet but firm, the laughter fading into something more serious. "You win." She paused in her menstruation, her hand hovering near his face. "I win what?" "We'll go to Cypher's Fall," he said. The words tasted like madness and destiny. "Let's go get you free." A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It was the first one he'd seen, and it transformed her, lighting her up from within, chasing the shadows from her eyes. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It was the first one he'd seen, and it transformed her, lighting her up from within, chasing the shadows from her eyes. It was the most dangerous thing he'd seen all day. He was all in. They were cruising through the Amethyst Nebula, a vast, silent cloud of violet and rose gold dust. The ship was quiet, the new converters humming a steady, reliable tune. The earlier conversation about his old partner, Tessa, hung in the air between them, an unspoken question. "She sold me out for a lighter sentence," Jeremy finally said into the silence, his gaze fixed on the swirling clouds of dead stars outside the view screen. "We were caught salvaging a corporate transport. They offered her a deal. She gave them everything. The ship, our private coaches, my access codes. I learned two things that day. Never trust a corporation and never trust a partner. And yet, here we are," Serena murmured, her voice soft from the co-pilot's seat. "A partnership born of corporate malfeasance." "Yeah, well," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I'm a slow learner." She rose from her seat and walked over to him, the space between them shrinking until she was standing beside his chair, her hip level with his shoulder. "You are not like her, Jeremy Radley," she whispered, her voice a low vibration in the quiet bridge. He turned his head to look up at her. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, a hesitant exploration. Then he felt it. Not a jolt of panic or fear, but a soft, tangible hum against his skin, the rising pulse of her own emotion. This time, it wasn't an invasion. It was an invitation. As the kiss deepened, the hum swelled into a rising chord, a feedback loop of sensation that made the distinction between their bodies blur at the edges. The bridge lights seemed to swim, shifting from their standard cool blue to the warm rose gold of the nebula outside.
reflecting the shared current of dizzying, overwhelming intimacy flowing between them. It was a connection that was more than skin deep, a shared frequency that vibrated in the very space between his atoms. They pulled away, both breathless, the air cracking with what they had just shared. "Fritz," he managed to say, his voice ragged. "Plot a course. Cypher's fall. Maximum speed." "Course plotted, Captain," the AI replied, its voice for once devoid of any sarcasm. "Hold on tight." Cypher's fall was a wound in the fabric of space. The rogue moonlet was shrouded in a perpetual corrosive storm, and its surface was a nightmare of haphazard construction. Towers of scrap metal and salvage tech clawed the sickly yellow sky, connected by a web of flickering bridges and walkways. The air tasted of acid rain and fried circuits. The sound was a constant layered assault. The hiss of rain on glowing holographic signs, the discordant synth music bleeding from 100 different bars, and the high-pitched whine of failing anti-grav units holding the entire chaotic mess together. They infiltrated the Black Spire, the moon's central data hub, through a maintenance tunnel, just as Serena had planned. The heist was a symphony of her meticulous planning and his talent for creating loud, chaotic diversions. While he was accidentally triggering a fire suppression system in a lower-level cantina, she was silently slicing through layers of digital security 3 floors above. They reached the central server room, a vast, cold cathedral of data. Towers of humming servers rose into the darkness, their indicator lights blinking like a galaxy of captive stars. "I'm in," Serena breathed, her hands a blur over the holographic interface she had summoned in the center of the room. Glowing lines of code streamed past her eyes. "I found my file. It's buried under layers of military-grade encryption, but I'm in, initiating digital execution." She paused, her fingers still moving. "But I'm adding a few things. I'm not just erasing the file. I'm building us a door." A progress bar appeared in the air at 5%, 10%. The main door at the far end of the server room hissed open with a pneumatic sigh. Caedmon Slade stood there, silhouetted against the light of the corridor. A blade of crackling black cord energy materialized in his hand. "Well, crap," Jeremy breathed. "Asset 919. Captain Radley," Slade said, his voice the calm, passionless sound of a machine. The door sealed behind him, plunging the room into the cool glow of the servers. "Your desperation was predictable. Did you think you could hide on the one moon in the galaxy I know better than my own ship? I have been tracking your comms chatter and energy signatures since you hit Atmo." He lunged, not with the lumbering charge of a brute, but with the explosive speed of a striking snake. The fight was brutal and short. Slade was a whirlwind of deadly motion, his movements economical and devastating. He disarmed Jeremy in seconds, the stun pistol clattering away into the darkness. The humming energy blade came to a stop inches from Jeremy's throat. Jeremy's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, any advantage. His gaze landed on a massive reinforced panel on the far wall, stenciled with a stark warning: "Emergency plasma coolant purge." Plan A is "don't die," his brain supplied. Plan B is "die in a cool way." This is definitely Plan B. He kicked a low-lying server rack into Slade's shins. The man barely flinched, but it was enough of a distraction. Jeremy scrambled to the far wall, smashed the protective glass on the purge control with his elbow, and yanked the lever down. Alarms blared, red lights flashing, bathing the room in a hellish glow. Serena, her face pale with the strain of the hack, saw his intent. The progress bar was at 80%. As the large circular vent in the floor began to glow cherry red, preparing to vent a column of superheated ionized plasma, she screamed, a sound of pure, concentrated rage and will. She threw her hands forward, a blinding arc of raw, bioelectric energy, the sum total of her fear and fury, erupted from her. It was not a spark. It was a bolt of living lightning. It slammed into the supercharged electromagnetic field forming around the venting plasma, amplifying it, turning it into a catastrophic, uncontrolled blast. The energy wave hit Slade. His cybernetic eye exploded in a shower of sparks, and his nervous system, hardwired into his suit, cooked from the inside out. As he convulsed, a marionette with its strings cut, Jeremy charged, tackling him with every ounce of his strength. They fell together into the vent just as it erupted, jettisoning Slade's molten remains into the storm-racked sky above. The backlash of the attack left Serena utterly spent. She crumpled to the floor like a dead weight. Jeremy, his ears ringing, scrambled to her side and caught her just as she fell. The klaxon was still blaring. The progress bar on the dying hologram hit 100%. Signature. Erased. Serena gasped against Jeremy's chest. Door is open. The server room doors were blown inward by an explosive charge. Armored Omnigen security forces stormed in, weapons raised.
Come on, Serena. Stay with me.
Jeremy grunted, hoisting her arm over his shoulder, her feet dragging as he half-carried, half-dragged her toward a side exit she had marked on his datapad.
Fritz, hot extraction, now!
As they stumbled through the corridors, Jeremy could hear panicked shouts on the security channel.
Containment breach in Sector Gamma 9. All units respond. The network is compromised.
Captain, Fritz's voice came through his earpiece, calm as ever. It appears all external port controls for the entire Spire are frozen, except for ours at Landing Pad 9. The Spire's security network seems to be arguing with itself. I estimate we have a 3-minute window. Serena's door. She had created a ghost for them to chase, buying them the time they needed. They burst out of a service hatch into the driving, acidic rain. Jeremy hot-wired a nearby cargo speeder, bundling the groaning Serena inside. A sleek Omnigen skiff fell in behind them as they peeled out, its targeting laser painting their rear fender with a deadly red dot.
They've got a lock.
Jeremy gritted out, pushing the speeder to its limits. Serena, barely conscious, weakly raised a hand. A tiny spark of blue electricity, a faint echo of the power she'd unleashed, sputtered from her fingertips. It was just enough to jump the speeder's chassis and short the skiff's targeting array for a precious second. Still got it, she mumbled before her head lolled back against the seat. Jeremy grinned. He reached the docking bay, helped Serena up the ramp of the rust bucket, and sprinted for the bridge, the bay doors already closing behind them.
Get us out of here, Fritz, now!
The ship tore free of its moorings, blasting out of the docking canyon and into the stormy sky, leaving the hellscape of Cypress Fall behind them forever. They were safe, adrift in the deep, quiet black of uncharted space, battered, bruised, but victorious and free. After Serena had recovered her strength, they came together in a desperate, passionate collision, consummation of their entire chaotic journey. The bioelectric hum between them was a constant, powerful undercurrent, a song only they could feel, blurring the lines where one of them ended and the other began, a shared existence in the space between heartbeats. Later, they stood on the bridge. The ship, miraculously, was spotless. The galley gleamed. The tools were stowed. Serena, it turned out, hated clutter with a fiery passion. Jeremy leaned back in his pilot's chair, a feeling of unfamiliar peace settling over him like a warm blanket. "All right," he said softly, his voice echoing in the clean, quiet space. "You're free. The galaxy is your oyster. So, what's the plan? Where can I drop you?" Serena turned from the view screen, her stormy eyes sparkling with a light he now recognized as mirth. She walked over, leaning against his console, her presence both a comfort and a quiet challenge. "I was thinking of hiring a pilot," she said, her voice a low, playful murmur. The job description is specific. I need someone dangerously unpredictable, surprisingly honorable, and he must have a ship that smells faintly of burnt circuits and questionable life choices. A wide, genuine grin spread across Jeremy's face.
I might know a guy. He's expensive, though. Demands a clean coffee mug every single morning.
I'm sure we can work out a partnership, she replied. Her fingers danced over the nav console, and a new course appeared on the main screen. A heading for a beautiful, uncharted nebula shimmering at the very edge of known space.
His rates are non-negotiable,
Jeremy said, his heart hammering against his ribs with something that felt a lot like hope. Serena leaned in, her lips brushing his ear, her breath warm against his skin.
We'll see about that.
She straightened up, her eyes on the star-dusted horizon ahead. Prepare for departure, Captain. All real work is just beginning. Jeremy Radley wrapped his hands around the worn controls of his ship, his partner by his side, and pushed the throttle forward, plunging them into the brilliant, unknown future they would build together.